To my understanding, there was a total of 29 bodies. 26, 27 of them under the house.
And the rest?
One was under the driveway, one was under the garage. So that makes a total of 29.
Okay. Now, from the standpoint of the arrest, when you were arrested in this...
December 22nd, 1978 is when I was arrested.
The notorious serial killer was executed early today at Stateville Prison in Joliet. Channel 3's John Paul was there when Gacy died.
In 1993, whilst writing his honour thesis, 18-year-old Jason Moss was researching for a project into the minds of serial killers, in which he established friendships with 5 of the most infamous murderers in American history: Jeffrey Dahmer, Richard Ramirez, Henry Lee Lucas, Charles Manson, and most notably, John Wayne Gacy. The months that passed, Jason had accumulated hundreds of letters back from these serial killers, detailing the deepest and darkest secrets. And what started out as a little project soon became an obsession. Week after week, letters were exchanged from Jason, seemingly doing everything that he could to get vital information out of them. Something that the police tried to do, but failed miserably. He would tell the killer exactly what they wanted to hear, telling Manson he'd carry on his work for him on the outside world, Ramirez that he wanted to kill people on his behalf. And although Jason had no intention of doing any of these wicked acts, it kept the communication flowing and gave an insight into the mind of a serial killer. Unbeknown to the likes of these evil men, Jason was using the letters to fuel his book that he'd been working on in the background, titled The Last Victim. And ironically, Jason was exactly that. But his most meaningful relationship was that with John Wayne Gacy, one of America's most notorious serial killers.
To my understanding, there was a total of 29 bodies, or 28 bodies, were found on the property. 26, 27 of them under the house. One was under the driveway, one was under the garage.
For years, John Wayne Gacy led a double life. From the outside world, Gacy was married. He was a successful businessman and an upstanding citizen. He used to dress up as a clown for the neighbourhood children, but secretly, he was a killer, luring young men into his home, where he would torture them and murder them. Many were found buried under the crawl space underneath his house.
6 more bodies unearthed from the basement crawl space of Gacy's Norwood Park Township home today, bringing to 15 the number found there since Friday. Floorboards and ceiling panels pried loose and carted out to the huge bin just outside the front door. Most of the attention has been centered on the 30-inch dirt crawl space. This is where 12 of the 13 bodies were buried. Searchers are being hindered by water, which keeps filling in their holes, a water problem which Gacy had used as an excuse to have trenches dug in the crawl space.
Jason was intrigued by Gacy's story, in which he wrote to him a letter and casted himself as the role as the ideal victim. Jason knew that Gacy had a turbulent relationship with his father, so in his letter, he played on that.
Dear Mr. Gacy, the constant screaming of my father keeps me secluded in my room when I'm not in school or at the gym. I hate it here at home, and I guess I understand what it's like to need a friend.
Soon after Jason sent the letter, he received one back. Gacy had taken the bait, and a letter straight from death row came through the post, with Gacy wanting to know more about Jason, and the pair communicated back and forth on a regular basis. Soon letters from Gacy was arriving weekly, and he also sent Jason some of his original artwork, which was selling for thousands of dollars in art galleries across America. Jason always thought he was one step ahead of Gacy. He thought he was the orchestrator, the one who called the shots and had the power in the relationship, but over time, it couldn't have been further from the truth. But being pen pals wasn't good enough, and Jason would receive collect calls to his home from Gacy's jail cell. As the calls became more frequent, Gacy was psychologically breaking Jason down. Slowly but surely, the master manipulator college writer was nothing more than a puppet on a string for serial killer Gacy. And Jason was offered to come and visit him in jail, to which he accepted, with Gacy funding the trip to the prison, where he was awaiting execution, and it would be the first time that they'd come face to face, after hundreds of letters and hours of telephone conversations. And the first encounter would scar the mind of Jason for the rest of his life.
My heart was racing. I mean, I was very scared, but I still felt kind of safe. All of a sudden, the guard shuts and locks the gate behind me and completely walks away. Now I'm left all alone in this room with John Wayne Gacy. I look up, and the camera that was in the room is completely turned away, facing at nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Jason knew how dangerous Gacy was. He'd studied the murders and how the victims were killed. But he believed naively that he could manipulate Gacy and get him to reveal secrets about the murders. But by modelling himself after his victims, he'd unleash something dark within Gacy, which brought him right back to his killing days. And it was at this moment Jason realised he was seriously in trouble, as he'd come face to face with the devil.
He started telling me how you're nothing without me. I could easily kill you right now. And by the time the guards got here, you'll have bled to death on the floor. You see this pen? I could stick this in your throat. And by the time the guards got here, you'll be dead on the floor.
You believe that?
Oh, I definitely did. You got to remember, the role I portrayed with John Wayne Gacy was of this weak, naive, submissive boy. But after being drilled for 2 hours by this man, that's exactly how I felt. Worthless. I felt like I was nothing. And I started to cry in front of Gacy. I sobbed. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't take it anymore. And when I was crying, it forced him to see me as a person for a brief period of time. And he kind of snapped out of it at this point in time.
Petrified and shaken, Jason's meet with Gacy came to an abrupt end. But it wasn't long before the letters and the telephone conversations started again. Any normal person would have completely severed ties with such a disturbing encounter and ended all communication. But soon after, Jason found himself back on a plane for a second visit.
And at this point he says, Jason, do you want me to show you the rope trick that everyone talks about?
The rope trick was Gacy's means of torturing his victims. After restraining them with handcuffs, he would loop a rope around their necks, slide a stick through the knot, and twist it to cut off their air. Jason demonstrated for me how Gacy placed a pen through the silver bracelet he was wearing and began to turn it.
But now my hand's starting to turn white from the pain. He's not letting go. He's still twisting this bracelet around my wrist. It's starting to hurt. Now I'm thinking, oh no, I'm losing control again.
Gacy was having flashbacks to his killing days. And with Moss all alone with him, he had him exactly where he wanted him. And if it wasn't for the sound of the jail door being unlocked by the guard, it quickly made Gacy snap out of it. Who knows what would have happened to Jason that day. Again, he was shaken and traumatised by the experience that he had with Gacy, and he seemed to be the final straw. The phone calls stopped, as did the letters, and with Jason now having all that he needed to complete his book, it was finally the end. of the twisted relationship.
Jason was so traumatized by his experience with Gacy that he cut off all contact with his serial killer pen pals. He finally came out of it when he wrote his book, The Last Victim. He says he told his story publicly in part to cleanse himself. As for John Wayne Gacy, he kept his date with the executioner just 2 months after his encounter with Jason Moss. Gacy was gone, but it was clear to me he was still very much with Jason.
Gacy won, you know? I mean, looking back, I got information from him, but he got what he wanted. He got to see me suffer. He got to see me squirm. And although he's been executed, he's always going to be a part of my mind. If I knew then what I know now, I would never have done it. Never have even written the first letter. It was too much. I mean, I was almost killed.
On the morning of May the 9th, 1994, Gacy was transferred to Stateville Correction Center to be executed. That afternoon, he was allowed a private picnic on the prison grounds with his family. For his last meal, Gacy ordered a bucket of KFC, French fries, a dozen fried shrimp, fresh strawberries and a Diet Coke. That evening he received his last rites from a Catholic priest before being escorted to Stateville execution chamber. At 12:40 a.m, the procedure to administer the lethal injection began, although the chemicals used in the execution solidified and unexpectedly clogged up the IV tube. The execution team replaced the clogged tube, and the execution resumed. The entire procedure took 18 minutes. One prosecutor at Gacy's trial said he got a much easier death than any of his victims.
He got a much easier death than any of his victims. In my opinion, he got an easier death than he deserved.
The notorious serial killer was executed early today at Stateville Prison in Joliet. Channel 3's John Paul was there when Gacy died.
As the sun set on Stateville Prison, serial killer John Gacy's appeals to put off his date with death faded too.
John Wayne Gacy was pronounced dead at 12:58 a.m.
The 52-year-old Chicago man who killed 33 young men and boys and buried them in his crawl space had spent 14 years on death row. His victims' families wanted more pain.
I'm glad it's over. I just wish that there could have been more suffering, so to speak. The punishment doesn't fit the crime.
And I'm just glad that finally a little justice was done in this matter.
Gacy was the first Illinois prisoner executed against his will in more than 3 decades. Witnesses say his final words were that his death amounted to murder by the state, and that it would not bring back anyone. Despite problems with one of the lethal injection tubes, witnesses say Gacy took a deep breath and died a peaceful death in 18 minutes. Dave Hockmeister arrested Gacy in 1978.
Do you see a finality here?
Yeah, I think that's it. To tell you the truth, I don't know. I was real angry with the whole situation, and I think this is just the conclusion.
Kill that clown! Kill that clown! Kill that clown!
Death penalty demonstrators at the prison who favored the execution far outnumbered the candle-carrying death penalty opponents.
No, he did horrible things. The things he did were truly evil, but that does not give us the right to take his life.
According to published reports, Gacy was a diagnosed psychopath who had not expressed any remorse for his crimes. His final statement to his lawyer before his execution was that killing him would not compensate for the loss of others, and that the state would be murdering him. As for Jason, he went on to complete his book, and it quickly became a bestseller with people eager to read about his friendship with America's most notorious serial killers, and especially his twisted relationship with Gacy. The book became that much of a success that some years later, there was a film made on it, and it was titled Dear Mr. Gacy. Moss later got married and joined the US Secret Service and also got into law. But as with having such experiences with serial killers, spending time with them, endless hours of phone calls and letters, Jason became traumatized as years rolled on by the whole experience, leaving him with constant nightmares and bouts of severe depression. He was scarred by the whole ordeal, and he never fully recovered from the psychological trauma he inflicted on himself. And sadly, Jason Moss took his own life with a single gunshot to the head at his home on June 6, 2006. The significance, if any, of his chosen suicide date, the 6th of the 6th of the 6th, had been subject to speculation. According to his co-author Jeffrey Kotler, Moss reportedly had delved heavily into satanic stuff, whilst researching material to prepare for his correspondence with serial killers.
Jason Moss was an 18-year-old freshman in college who was very precocious, very curious, and on some level very obsessed with facing his greatest fears, which were serial killers. I met him when he was 20 and still recovering and still suffering from his close calls with the subject that intrigued him the most. And that's what led us to work on our book together, The Last Victim, and led us to work on this film, Dear Mr. Gacy.
He believed by doing this, he got himself into a very bad place before he died. Jason Moss was definitely the last victim. Not just to Gacy, but to all the serial killers he came into contact with, and his life was never the same. And ultimately, his quest to delve into the darker side of things cost him his life. Thanks for watching the video, and don't forget to leave a comment down below. I'd love to know your thoughts on this case. And until the next one, I'll see you all soon.
I killed 33 times. You're only gonna kill me once. Gacy outsmarted him again.
Shoelaces, huh? You're in trouble now. Yeah, right. Aren't you afraid sitting that close to me? What the hell? Oh, this is too long. Why don't you put your hand out? Okay, here. What I told him, I said, here, all you do is you wrap it around, you put one knot in it. And I said, then you put a second knot in it. Okay? Mm-hmm. I said, then you take a stick and stick it in here, and you just turn this. And I said, it causes a tourniquet. I said, that's the only knot I ever learned.